You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
And welcome to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd coming at you with another wonderful episode. We are one step closer to episode 300, which I am amazed by. And joining me right now, all the way in Portland, Oregon, we have the greatest legal mind of the Pacific Northwest, Professor Aubrey. How you doing?
I am doing great, Nerdy Tim. How are you doing this week?
Well, I mean, I threw it to you first. I mean, we will go over me.
Okay.
That's my favorite topic after all.
So there are some, I haven't been on the show in a really long time. So
Yes, this is your triumphant return.
my triumphant. So, what's been going on with me this week? It's a good question. I've been working really hard because it is the end of the term, which means it's the beginning of the next term. And Professor Aubrey has lots and lots of things to do for students during this time. So it's the time of my job that I'm most overworked, I'd say. So I have been spending a lot of time dealing with that and, just chilling out, keeping my house clean in all the ways.
There you go.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, me, we will get to me momentarily, but, one thing I want to address right now is someone whose absence is conspicuous right now.
That's right.
Yes, the Reverend Tracy. As the Reverend mentioned on our last episode, the Mr. Reverend had one hell of an opportunity that, he would be foolish to pass up job-wise. A government job, union, and all that stuff, great money that was going to take them to New Hampshire, and, with the baby Reverend on the way as well. The Reverend's going to be quite busy for a while. So as of right now, the Reverend is going to be taking a little bit of break from the show. My hope is that at some point in the very near future, we'll be able to get back to a good recording, weekly recording routine. But, I think the important thing, first and foremost is that, the Reverend family make that move and let the baby Reverend make its debut. Make his debut, because that alone is going to take some time, to be able to just rest, recover, recuperate. Very popular over in Portland, Oregon there, I see. But yeah, so the Reverend will be taking a break. But like I said, I hope, at some point in the very near future, we'll be able to record again because the Reverend has definitely been a very, very important part of Friends Talking Nerdy. Very, very important.
Of course, co-founder,
Yeah, very important part of my life too. And yeah, just done so much to help make the show so much better. So, we will definitely keep you updated on in that regard, folks. But that leads to me right now. I mentioned a little bit of this on social media, but with the Reverend moving, the fact that I've been currently living with them up to this point, left me in a little bit of a situation, and that was: do I continue to stay in Maine? Or do I have another option? And the more I thought about it, the more what boiled down to was a couple of things. One, I am not the richest person on the face of the earth. And, thanks to a vindictive ex-wife, unless I get very lucky, I will never be the richest person on the face of the earth. And, when you are basically, I will always be in a spot where I'm going to be one missing paycheck away from being broke, being out on the street or stuff like that. And, living out in a state to where I don't have a support system at all is probably not the smartest move. That's not to say that the Reverend, and the Mr. and Mrs. Reverend wouldn't help, of course, but they're going to be 2 hours away. I mean, they're going to be very limited as to what they would be able to do, of course. So to me, I felt the important thing was to get back to, a support system I know I do have, and that's in Portland, Oregon. So, I did decide to make that move. And, thanks to the professor, I will have a landing spot when I get back to be able to get back on my feet. And also, too, with that support system, I'll be able to, not only rekindle friendships, but, deepen the ones that I do have, I mentioned the Reverend taking a break. When, if and when the Reverend comes back, that doesn't mean you are going away. We have another podcast that we can, dust off and get back up. Hump Day. I mean, I love, podcasting, and I've loved the experiences I've done podcasting with you. And, getting back to Portland, Oregon, being that we will be in the same time period, I think will be a great, great for us to be able to, podcast whenever we want and all that stuff. And I think number two, the biggest thing was my kids, the ones that I talk to. Like my oldest, I know he's going through like one of his first major breakups. He's 22. My youngest, Lucy, is going through the despairs of being a 17-year-old child with, additional other things that are going on as well. And I think more than anything, I think me being back in Portland, Oregon would help out with that. So, by as we record this, I'm about 4 days away from getting on a plane and heading back home.
Yes, and I'm about 4 days away from welcoming you back home, and I'm really excited about it.
I am too. Being what's that saying? Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Yeah. Like when I left Portland, I was in a severely depressed state for a number of reasons. And, maybe we'll go into them, maybe we won't. But, being away and being able to have the job that I did here that was physical, but allowed me to, listen to music and think and all that stuff, made me realize that, the bad place that I thought Portland was at the time that I left really wasn't that bad, especially for someone in my financial predicament. The big reason alone, TriMet. It may seem silly to think public transportation is a good thing, but when you do have a town that has a public transportation system that allows people in my situation to have full-time jobs, to have a social life, all due to public transportation, that is a support system that is not here in Maine.
Yes. And I'm real happy that you're going to be back in a place where there is public transportation that can get you around. Mm-hmm. I think it would totally be worth talking about sometime, the transit system, because here in Portland, because I really think it should be free for everyone, and that we should use taxes just like they did the arts tax to fund that. Because if it's free, people will use it. We used to have this thing called Fairless Square here in Portland that was a square-ish shape right in the middle of the city where you could ride the bus for free. And those buses downtown were full all the time.
Yeah, and I think, studies do show that, the towns that do have good public transportation systems essentially end up paying for themselves because, like I said, people in my financial predicament are able to get out and do a lot more. They're able to go out and have full-time jobs at, any time of the day. They're able to go out and shop and spend money and have a social life and have fun. And, that's not knocking.
What do you mean? Being treated as a human?
I know. Imagine that, in our capitalistic society.
Doing that.
Yeah, I know.
I think we're seeing and about to see many more, corporate shenanigans as the economy goes down in flames.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like corporations are pretty much being very blatantly open about the fact that they're taking advantage of the situation, intentionally raising prices, and major corporations are making killer profits, and they're just banking off of this, and yet the people will continue to blame the wrong people for this. They're supporting the people that have the boots on their necks.
They're believing that their enemies are trans people, LGBTQA people, people who have abortions, people who are sex workers. There are just lots of boogeymen to blame. And I think in those states where they don't want to pay, right, where they want to have low taxes, they don't have the infrastructure and the ability to provide those services. And so who ends up on the bus? The people who can not afford any other transportation, and that's it. Yeah. And that's not going to create a self-sustaining transit system.
It's not, I guess here, it's my understanding that a lot of people look down upon people that use public transit, you're riding that thing with homeless people. And no, that is not what public transit is for. Do homeless people use public transit services? Yes, I'm not denying that. But you have to acknowledge the benefits that a good public transportation system brings to you. And, being in Maine made me appreciate that all the more. I mean, I've been lucky during my time here to be able to have a job that I could walk back and forth from. But that's another thing. I mean, with employment being what it is, there was no guarantee that I was going to be at that job forever. And, I would only be limited in my employment to the jobs that I could walk to and back to and fro from, if I can talk.
Right. And, I think in many places, the area where the jobs is not close to where the affordable housing is.
Yes.
And so then you get caught in this catch-22 of not being able to get to work to be able to afford the cheapest housing in the city that you happen to be in, right?
Well, I mean, that's true in Portland, Oregon. I mean, people, the cheaper places to live are going to be like in your Greshams or, the outskirts of town. And, those people, if they do want to have a job in, downtown Portland proper, and I had to do it myself when I first moved to Portland. That's taking the bus for a couple of hours. Now, for me, I get a good set of headphones. I'm not going to complain unless the bus driver thinks it's okay to pack the bus like sardines. But, for a lot of other people, it's like they don't necessarily have that freedom to take 2 hours, to and from the work to be able to do that. I mean, think about a single mother. I mean, it's like she could potentially get a better paying job in downtown Portland, but that's 4 hours out of her day that she's not going to be able to be home to be able to take care of her kids.
She's going to have to pay for childcare during that time, and that's going to result in the working not making economic sense. Mm-hmm.
So, which means she would have to take advantage of employment that's probably not as savory, so it's no place is going to be perfect. Let's put it that way. But, again, for me in my current situation, it's important to be, I feel it's important to be in a support system that it will best benefit me. And at this point, because of the dominoes as they've fallen, Portland, Oregon is that support system, and thankfully I've got wonderful, beautiful people like you there to support me.
That is right. We are all just here waiting for 4 days. So by the time this comes out, you will be in...
No, this episode's coming out tomorrow. As we record it, if you are hearing this the day this episode drops on Saturday, we've recorded this the day before.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I
thought we were a week ahead or something.
No, we're never that prepared on Friends Talking Nerdy.
Not nerdy enough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I've been watching too much Star Trek lately. I did finish another rewatch of Star Trek: The Next Generation, so definitely recommend that, folks.
Wow. It's been a
And
long time since I've seen every episode.
uh, it's yeah. I mean, kind of same here as well. But it was really it really, in my opinion, if I have like a nerdy five of television shows, it's on the nerdy five. If not the number one, very close to number one, just because even with the first season and how the first couple seasons they were trying to get their footing, I think easily one of the best shows ever made.
Nice. Would you put Doctor Who on that list?
Not yes and no, but that's the tough part about Doctor Who. But the beauty of Doctor Who is the fact that, it's been on for so long, and due to the conceit that they built in with the fact that the main character can regenerate essentially into another person, it becomes a new show every time a new doctor is born. So there are times where there have been doctors that I've loved, and there have been times where there are doctors where I'm turning the channel. Like the Peter Capaldi era didn't really work for me. I tried to get into the Jodie Whittaker era because I was really supportive and wanted to like a woman doctor, but the stories I felt didn't really support her as well as they should have. But because of that, because it's been on so long and they've had the peaks and valleys in terms of the quality, I don't know if I could put it in my top 10. I mean, they've had some great seasons, they've had some great episodes. Like Douglas Adams, who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, used to be a showrunner on there and wrote some of their absolute best episodes. But there have also been some really, really bad ones.
Mm-hmm. I think I've mostly seen the really bad ones.
Yeah, and I think the bad ones too, like, are the later end of the original run of the series in the 80s, and that also corresponded with the time that, American sci-fi television was giving us Star Trek: The Next Generation, where audiences, at least in America, were expecting a lot more for their buck. They expected a lot more quality instead of the, plastic, monsters like, ooh, I'm a scary alien. They wanted some better effects. And, the original Doctor Who didn't quite give that. But anyway, we are here to wrap up Love Month. That's going on for more than a month. And we are going to be talking about a topic that, I think anybody that's ever been in a romantic relationship at all is something that should be near and dear to your heart. NRE, new relationship energy. Do you want to tell the folks about NRE?
Sure. New relationship energy, or NRE as it is commonly called by people who know what it is a state of your brain when you are at the beginning of a relationship with someone, or a sexual relationship, so a romantic or a sexual relationship. At the beginning, when you are so passionately attracted, you are compelled to be with this person as much as possible, and that is what new relationship energy is like. So it's huge, and it's hugely influential on your decision making. So in that way, to me, it is very similar to sex brain, where you've maybe made some decisions about your boundaries, but then you get in the moment and you're like, yeah, screw that boundary. I'll do whatever I want, right?
Ass to mouth, give it to me.
2 girls, 1 cup.
Ew.
I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
I've watched 30 seconds of it and I almost vomited. It was like, ew, I had to turn it off.
Aristocrats. I don't even know what it is, right?
It's, you don't want to see it, trust me. It's okay. Just, yeah, gross.
Let's not go down that path anymore, but it's a similar brain state. So when we talk about the brain, we understand so much more about it. So we're able to identify the different kinds of chemicals that might be influencing our behavior. And so that is really what's going on with new relationship energy. Would you agree with that?
Indeed. And I think, it's important to realize what it is because, there are going to be times to where, you meet up with somebody and the chemistry is there and you get all hot and bothered with this other human being. But then the NRE stops and you realize that all you really had was those chemicals. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, folks. But, recognizing that, you're not going to put yourself into a situation to where after 6 months you got a child on the way and you're married like me.
Let me ask you about that, Tim. Just so we put this a little bit in context. Now, so you met your ex-wife. Did you have new relationship energy with her?
Oh yeah, like we were let's put it this way. There was one point to where we even planned to make a musical. We didn't go through with any of it, but it was just one of those things to where, we would talk on the phone to all hours of the night, spend all kinds of time together, had a lot of fun in her van, stuff like that. But ultimately, we didn't lay down the foundation for a proper relationship because we really shouldn't have. At the end of the day, it was from day one, a square peg in a round hole. And, me being the people bad girl. Anyway, me being the people-pleasing person that I was, I thought that if I change, I can become what she wants. When no, that does, and I'm not talking about, compromise. There's compromise in any relationship, if you're in a romantic relationship, maybe playing video games for 17 hours out of your day every day is not going to lead to a healthy relationship. You have to be able to take time away to, spend those quality time together. But, if you are making decisions that go against your inner beliefs, it won't turn out right at all. It will end up imploding at some point.
Yeah. So that's why it's really important that you remember your value and your baseline level of desire. And we this week read an article that included lots of information about new relationship energy, right, Tim?
Indeed. It's from the good folks at Psychology Today. Yet another benefit of the Reverend Tracy introducing us to that wonderful website with such great content. The article was The Rise and Inevitable Fall of New Relationship Energy by Nan J. Wise, PhD. She is a cognitive neuroscientist, licensed psychotherapist, certified sex therapist, and the author of Why Good Sex Matters. The main summary of the bullet points here is that NRE refers to the intense passion that is common in a new relationship. Desire quickly ramps up due to changes in signals in the brain, but eventually habituation kicks in and our brain chemistry settles down. And when we forget our baseline level of desire, comparing the high of NRE to its eventual decline can feel like a loss or falling out of love. And what we're going to do is what we normally do here on Friends Talking Nerdy, and that's bounce back and forth with some of the bullet points from the article. And discuss them and talk about things that in our own life that apply to that, because again, the whole point about talking about NRE is to make people aware of it. I mean, I didn't become aware of it until my 40s. It's like I lived through it, but I didn't realize it was a thing. Once you realize it's a thing, then you can better prepare yourself when you do encounter it to not fall into some of the traps that you do when you are under that state, to where the other human that you're in a romantic relationship with is the absolute best person in the world. They're totally perfect. Oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah. So it really is this honeymoon phase of the relationship.
So yeah, speaking of that, we'll tackle that first paragraph there, and then we'll dive into our conversation.
Okay, great. Are you familiar with the honeymoon period of a relationship? That ecstatic, crazy in love period of a new relationship when all you want to do is rip each other's clothes off and make love 24/7.
I know.
When you seem to be aroused by the mere sound of their voice, the scent of their skin, sex during this phase is intense, passionate, and seems so easy for most people. Then after a few months or years, the excitement seems to wear off. You're no longer new to each other. Alas, some people even think they're no longer in love.
You should probably tackle the next paragraph too. It ties in.
Okay. What I have just described is the phenomenon called new relationship energy, or NRE. And it eventually decreases and may even totally wear off. It's not because you've fallen out of love, it's because the neurochemical cocktail that fuels the ecstatic feelings and nonstop lust naturally winds down. Over the past several years, researchers have begun to identify not only the brain areas related to new relationship energy, but also the neurochemicals involved. The major areas identified include the ventral tegmentum, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, all areas that play roles in our reward pathway. So, as somebody who has a very complex brain chemistry, I can actually see the variation of that people would experience depending on their own brain chemistry. It's going to be based on some baseline. And that I don't think dispassionate, generally people who are generally dispassionate, they don't turn into someone else, right? If they're not the kind of person that buys gifts, they're not going to suddenly start bringing you flowers every week. Mm-hmm. Because some elements of your personality remain, despite the fact that you're being flooded with oxytocin and dopamine and all of those chemicals that we know make us feel good.
Indeed, but as the paragraphs did mention, that when you do find that person, and I think anybody who's had that type of rush of brain chemicals happen, can understand that, if you've ever had that person to where, you're talking for like 8 hours and you just can't stop and you want to keep on talking to them more, that's part of the whole NRE process. And,
well, and I think I remember when I was a kiddish, when I was going through puberty and experiencing my first relationships, whether they were walks or dating for 2 weeks or whatever it was, right? Mm-hmm. When there was a breakup, it was so hard to handle. And I think over the years, even, knowledge of NRE may help, but I think you have to experience it before you can really identify how it affects you. And that's the only way you can figure out how to deal with it in a way that is more rational, even when you're under the influence of NRE.
Yeah, I mean, you do gotta, in some ways, think of it like a drug because, it is chemicals that are, hitting, the reward pathways of your brain, as the paragraphs mentioned. And yeah, unless you never have romantic relationships at all or intense friendships too, I think, NRE could easily tie into, that person you meet at work that suddenly becomes your absolute best friend and you do everything with. It's just, again, there will come a time to where there will be a dip to where that friend may not want to hang out with you as much, or the person you're dating, may think like, hey, I don't need to be up every night till 3 o'clock in the morning when I got to get up at 6 o'clock to wake up for work,
right?
Type of deal. And it's more than anything. Yeah. It's not in recognizing what NRE is. I think it helps prepare you for the whole experience, because it is an experience. The rise part of NRE is a wonderful thing to experience. When you are with the person that you think is the absolute bestest in the whole wide world, it is a beautiful thing. But again, I think it in a way, though, it can make you. It can make it to where you don't necessarily think logically, to where you don't think that, hey, hold up, take a breath. I can't possibly give them everything they want. They can't possibly give me everything I want. We have to, to take this responsibly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge trap to think, oh, I've found the one.
There is no such thing as the one. I mean, even
There's not.
Yeah, I mean, even for monogamous there is the person that you end up marrying, and even if you are married to them for 50, 60, 70 years, they can't possibly fulfill your every need, and vice versa. The important thing is recognizing that.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, like long-term marriages, because I think, they're getting fewer and fewer. But I think most of them were pretty unhappy. Like, we talk about those people who, like, oh, the sweet old couple that hold hands all day and, want to be close to each other, and isn't that sweet? Sounds pretty codependent to me. Like, sounds like one of them didn't really have a life if they're able to be so harmonious for that long. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, that is a cynical way to look at it, and more than likely true, though. I mean, admittedly so, because, like society norms for, if we're talking relationships between men and women, society norms 50, 60 years ago were a lot different than they are today. To where women were essentially expected to just, grin and bear it, especially if, their husband wasn't the greatest guy in the world. But, thankfully, we had a little thing called no-fault divorce that suddenly became a thing that, gave women a lot more freedom. And, I think because of that, maybe we don't necessarily have people that are lasting in marriages that long, but that's because they're recognizing that they don't have to if it's a bad situation.
Right. That it's just like it doesn't take two people to break up. Mm-hmm. It only takes one person to break up. And you get to break up anytime you want to, for whatever reason or for no reason at all. Unilaterally. And if you don't feel like you have that freedom, are you really choosing that person? Or are you just with that person because it's a habit?
I mean, it could be that. I mean, I think, thinking back on my marriage, I think the reason it lasted 14 years, speaking only for myself, was I didn't think I would be able to, make a life for myself outside of that. Life proved me wrong in many, many ways, thank goodness. But a lot of people do have that fear, especially, when you do get caught up in like a toxic situation to where, you're being told you're the most horrible person on the face of the earth. You tend to believe that, and you would much rather have the known that may be poisonous and toxic than the unknown, to where it's much more scarier, Now, having said that, there are people that maybe they fall out of love, but maybe they also don't dislike each other so much that they want to be out of each other's lives. Maybe they do find something in each other that they still want to have that connection.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of it as a personal connection. Like, if you can't have a romantic or a sexual or whatever you're looking for, you can still have a personal connection with that person, I think. Where you're not pursuing or any kind of potential type of relationship, but you're just enjoying each other's company for whatever time you're together.
Indeed. But let's move on here. The first big bullet point of the article is the brain on new relationship energy. I will dive in with the first paragraph and we'll go from there. Dopamine is flooding our system, and all we want and all we do is want, want, want. Sound familiar? At the same time, we are experiencing high levels of oxytocin and vasopressin, which is reinforced with even more sensual contact. And even cortisol levels become elevated, since falling into love is a kind of stressor as the individual goes through the concerns and potential insecurities of the new relationship. NRE is also associated with decreased levels of serotonin, cueing up the not-so-delightful tendency of ruminating that can be the dark side of an NRE, where the person obsessively thinks about the partner. Incidentally, people who suffer from OCD tend to have lower levels of serotonin, which reversed after successful treatment. And I'm glad they did mention that, too, because, I've certainly been guilty of that in the past where, NRE levels ended up being different, and mine was still on the high side, and I became obsessive, thinking about that person all the time. And I think anybody in a romantic relationship, it gets to that point somewhat, but again, I think the importance of knowing what NRE is to, once you realize that it's there, I think it can help break you from, because obsession in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing at the start of a relationship, but it can turn into that,
Yeah. So some people call this having a limerence object. Have you ever heard that?
I have, but tell me what it is. No, I mean, I've heard the name, but I don't know the definition.
Yeah, it's pretty much a person that you're focused on, and you can't focus on yourself because you're so focused on this other person. And typically it's a person that has not expressed interest in you, or who's not dating you, right? It's this.
So me in high school.
Yeah, it's almost like a way of thinking about the object of your crush, right? But this person who becomes an object to you that sticks around no matter what else is going on in your life. Mm-hmm. And I think we should try not to have limerence objects, because it's all future tripping, right? If you are obsessed with someone, it's usually because, what I think of as obsession is not, I think about that person all the time, and I'm just wishing them love and hope their day is going well and they're happy. Like, I think that's a different thing from an obsession trying to think of, what does this person think of me? What's going to happen, next week? I want to marry this person, and so I'm going to fantasize about this wedding that's going to happen, and all these other things that you do that you're worried about what's the future.
Because that turns into you not necessarily falling for the person themselves. You're falling for the idea you have in your head of that person. And that idea and the reality will never mesh. Will never, ever mesh.
Because people don't see themselves as they truly are most of the time. Mm-hmm. People either beat up on themselves unnecessarily or have confidence that kind of doesn't make sense. And, I think a lot of people struggle with one or the other of those.
Not me. No, I'm kidding, of course.
Not to toot my own horn, toot.
Yeah. But anyway, dive into the next paragraph there.
Okay. So think of NRE like a biological highlighter. It quickly ramps up our desire set point to record highs.
Record highs, yeah.
What?
To record highs, not record highs.
No, it's to record highs.
Well, anyway, go ahead. You're like, I'm a professor, Tim. Yeah.
Don't correct my English. My gosh. It powerfully focuses our attention on the new lover, increasing our interest and motivation to get to know the person, to find out if there's more than just chemistry in the attraction, and then ultimately settle in, if all goes well, to do the work of bonding to build a sustainable relationship. People with high levels of seeking may be more susceptible to chasing the NRE buzz, what I call new relationship euphoria, or even new relationship folly. What also is vastly misunderstood is that NRE tends to ramp up spontaneous desire well over baseline, while responsive desire remains intact. And so we're going to talk about these record highs and what baselines are, etc. Right? The article goes more into that.
Yeah, that'll be in the next part there. But I did like the mention here of, doing the work of bonding to build a sustainable relationship, and I think that is the importance of knowing what NRE is. It's like you're not just continuing to ride that wave. I mean, you got to recognize that that initial burst is just a burst. It's like a firework going off, or whatever, something like that. But, there you can have all the physical passion you want for somebody, but that doesn't mean that you and the other person are going to be compatible for a long-term sustainable relationship. I mean, you're not, because physical chemistry is not relationship chemistry, if that makes sense.
That's absolutely right. And, for me, the work of building, a sustainable relationship and the work of bonding need to be paid attention to at every stage of the relationship. And so when I think of NRE, I think of, I could stay in bed with somebody for like 8 hours and be perfectly content. And that's not what life is about, right? Life is about, can I work? Can I have some hobbies? Can I have friends? Can I have time to myself? Sort of all those things we want to remain in balance just don't matter anymore under the influence of NRE. And the problem with that is that when nothing else matters, we stop maintaining those things that are so important to our happiness. And when we do that, when we give those things up for the sake of laying in bed for 8 hours, it can be really confusing when you stop wanting to do that and all of a sudden you don't have anything in common with the other person.
There's that. And, you mentioned the friends aspect. I mean, it's not uncommon for people that are falling in love to be so in love with each other that, they don't hang out with their other friends as much. You will often hear friends, lamenting the fact that, they lost another friend because of a relationship. And that unfortunately does happen. And I think, if anything, the importance of realizing, what NRE is that, to your point, every now and then, sure, it is amazing to be able to spend that 8 hours in bed just, naked, holding each other and enjoying each other's company. But yeah, that is not sustainable because, if that's all you're doing, how are you going to get a job to pay for the place where the bed is? And also too, the whole idea that even again, in a monogamous relationship, that other human being is not ever going to be able to fulfill all of your needs. That is what you have friends for. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to sustain those friendships with people in order to make it to where when you get back with the person that you are in love with, to basically sustain not necessarily, maybe sustain the high is not the right word, but to be able to continue to, go along with it in a more sustainable long-term way.
Right. Absolutely.
Indeed. All right. Next bullet point here, coming down from record high desires. I'll read the first paragraph here. As NRE settles down, we may feel a big loss as we compare our ramped-up desire point relative to baseline. This is essentially what happens in the process of the desire curve. We forget about our original baseline desire and just compare the peak to what we experience after NRE resolves. We feel a loss. We feel a lack. Partners who enjoyed being pursued for sex feel abandoned when the sizzle subsides. Grown men whine that their women don't crave sex with them or want them anymore. Women feel deficient if they are no longer so intensely motivated to have sex. Even men can feel that their sexuality is somehow diminished as they return to baseline and are no longer fueled by the ramped up lust of NRE. And it happens. It definitely happens, and I think the important part is acknowledging the fact that that happens and doing your best to prepare for that. Because when two people meet in a romantic situation, that initial high is never, you're really not going to be able to achieve that again. And why would you too? Because, the people that you are, in year 1 of the relationship is going to be different than what it is in year 5 of the relationship, in year 10. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I think is interesting about that paragraph is how sexist it is and how unfriendly to LGBTQA people. Like, it's just this language, partners who enjoyed being pursued. Grown men whine that their women don't crave sex. Women feel deficient. Like, it just feels like it's using gender in an inappropriate way. And so, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, because it
not be true for the majority of queer people because we have different relationship structures.
But at the end of the day, though, even the LGBTQIA folks experience this as well. I mean, NRE.
Sure.
I mean,
no,
NRE.
Absolutely. NRE is universal.
Yes.
But I just didn't like the way the paragraph focused on gender as this way of determining how you were going to respond. I think it has to be more complicated than that.
Yeah, I mean, we're not. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of definitions of what men are, what women are, that aren't really true. It's just society says that they're true. And
lots of stuff about sex is that way.
Oh, I remember at the Apple store, this one ignorant guy from Vancouver came in one time and started making snarky comments about the pink iPhone. And I was like, why? Why are you upset about it? Because it's pink. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, I think it's only a woman's color. Why is it a woman's color? There are plenty of guys that I know who wear pink and, wear it just fine. That, that doesn't make them women. That doesn't make them gay. That just makes them looking good in pink. I will say, like, pink is not a color that everybody can pull off, but it's not a woman's color,
Right. Just like blue is not only for men.
Yeah, because like in the 1800s, I think it was reversed. I mean, like, if anything, I mean, but it's, what society defines as what roles should be, 9 times out of 10 is bullshit.
You know what, Tim? We'd be wearing rags, you and me. We wouldn't be worried about the color of our clothing.
We'd
dream of having warm clothes, probably.
Yeah, I would just want to hope that if we were back in the 1800s, that I showed you the video of that TikTok woman who's the the lumberjack based out of Canada, but she's like a gay lumberjack type, and most of her videos are just her chopping wood, and it's just like, if only I could find a woman like that.
Well, I think it's interesting too. This paragraph really focuses on the desire curve. And it's interesting because I don't know what my baseline desire is, right? And I think many of us don't. I think we go through phases throughout our lives of being one way or the other with regard to sexual or romantic relationships. And I had a better point than that.
Thank you, Weed.
Besides it being sexist, I thought the desire curve was interesting, and then being able to identify your own baseline and say, "Oh, I'm not feeling like having sex, but that's what I'm like when I'm single."
And that. Yeah, and that can be tough too, because like you don't want to let the other person down, for instance. Like if your desire is lessening, but your partner still is a rather randy person, you don't necessarily want to let them down. But the more you don't acknowledge where your baseline is, or the fact that you are coming down from the NRE, the more, you could build up resentment over time. It's like you got to have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you want me to read the next paragraph?
Yeah, dive into that next paragraph.
Okay. You will note that general levels of spontaneous and receptive desire are higher overall for men. Some more of this. And for men, the receptive desire levels are quite similar to those of spontaneous desire. So both spontaneous and receptive desire are following along the same curve. For both sexes, spontaneous desire peaks at the apex of new relationship energy, in the throes of the new love where passions run high. For women, unlike men, the only time when spontaneous desire consistently exceeds receptive desires, other than during ovulation, which is not shown, which I think is unfair to women, because at ovulation, you get super randy. Sorry, I keep talking during my reading.
Nothing wrong with
that. And finally, for both sexes, you'll notice that spontaneous and receptive desire return to a baseline quite similar to that which preceded the NRE. And so I think, it reminds me of something called lesbian bed death. Have you ever heard of it?
I have not. Let's fill our audience in.
Yeah, okay. So it's a phenomenon when two women who love women, or, I think that's fine, because I think the definition of women is quite broad. But
no pun intended.
Yeah, definitely no pun intended.
Shut up, Tim. Anyway.
So lesbian bed death. So this is where two women who love women have really great sex for some period of time, and then they just stop having sex altogether, because it becomes routine, because it becomes predictable, because it's not spontaneous, maybe because the two of them can't figure out who's going to be the one who initiates, or they don't, one is more receptive, the other is more action oriented.
I just want to cook these lentils tonight. No.
Right. So, I think it's interesting to note that, you kind of go back to your baseline desire level. And so what I like to make sure I'm doing is having, I think this way about movement too. So with regard to movement, I'm like, if I want to be doing what I'm doing with my body 10 years from now or 20 years from now, I want to be dancing, I want to be walking, I want to be swimming, I want to be riding my bike. If I don't do those things now, there's no way I'm going to be able to do those things in the future. Like, it's downhill from now on, physicality wise, being almost 50. And so it's similar to that with sex. So if you get in the routine of having sex on a regular basis, you'll have more desire to have sex. That's what I've always believed.
Yeah. And, I think more than anything, what the paragraph said to me too was it showed the importance. And, in the article, which, will be in the show description if you folks at home want to read it through, I think it shows the importance of not making long-term life decisions in the midst of an NRE high, because once that high goes down, and it will, you don't want to be stuck. You don't want to be in a spot to where, you realize that this ain't working out and we don't have as much in common and we're not as sexually attracted as we were anymore. And, that could lead to bad feelings. I think, like in any relationship, like if, two people that are getting married, like, and I learned this the hard way, folks, the important thing to do at the start of a marriage when everything is going good and they're the greatest partner in the world is to talk about what could potentially happen if divorce ever becomes a thing. Because if you prepare for divorce at a time to where you are both in a good mood, you're both going to be thinking more logically and more loving instead of being in a spot to where when you do break up, like in my case, you have the ability to hurt the other person just because you can, because of the fact that they don't have those same feelings for you anymore that they used to have at a particular time.
Well, maybe. Maybe that's true. Going back to something from an earlier paragraph, before we started talking about the desire curve, we were also talking about the concept of bonding to build a sustainable relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're talking about here maybe interferes with that bonding, because the bonding is about enjoying things in the moment that you have in common. And if all you're doing is having sex, of course, you don't learn what somebody is into. And
you like to read?
I never noticed you have a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Indeed. I mean, it's more than anything too, like what I've learned, and for being such a chaotic person in a lot of ways, it can be tough, but it's the importance of managing your life properly, and that means managing your relationships properly. In terms, if you are making sure you give appropriate time to your partner. And then, making sure that you do pull yourself out and, put yourself out into the world in terms of hanging out with your friends or going, through with your hobbies. Like if you going to the movies on a regular basis, then go to the movies on a regular basis. Don't skip that just to hang out with someone that you're currently in love with. I mean, it's great if you can bring them along, but if they don't happen to be a fan of going to the movies, don't stop doing that because they don't like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's
the other thing I think is important to maintain your own self-care is that if you have a self-care routine, and I have recently, as a person with ADHD, I have developed a morning routine and everything else I want to accomplish during the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have it in a checklist that I have on the fridge, and I want to check everything off every day. But some days I don't.
And that happens.
But I know that as long as I'm trying to fulfill those things, I'm actually caring for myself. It is stuff like take a shower, take your meds, brush your teeth. It goes through every little thing that I want to do. And it also has stuff on it like practice guitar for 20 minutes, go on a walk for 2 miles, and these things I'd really like to do every day. If I stop doing those things, if I just say, fuck that checklist, I'm going to just live my life and spend most of my time with my partner, and I'm going to structure my life around my partner's schedule, I don't have anything left of self-care or friends when the 50% chance that we're going to break up happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely important for your own mental health. And, the Reverend Tracy has told me, a lot. I mean, the Z loves checklists. And, even if you are making a checklist of items that are the most trivial, like you mentioned, brushing your teeth, getting up, or, practicing guitar, something you would do anyway, the mere act of, simply having a list to check it off on feels like an accomplishment and, gives you a little reward burst in the brain, and it encourages you to keep going.
Yeah, it totally does. And the other thing it does for some, for people who are disorganized and have a hard time with schedules, etc., it
No.
It literally kind of pulls me through my day. Like I can go consult it when I'm feeling like overwhelmed with I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Which happens for a lot of people with ADHD for about an hour before you do something and about an hour after you do something. And so the more you can decrease that anxiety through things like checklists, the better.
Indeed, and if anything, too, stuff like a checklist would be a great way to manage your life properly. It would complete your self-care needs while also making sure that you do have the time available for that other special person in your life.
Yep.
All right, let's dive into the last paragraph here. The critical takeaway point here is that you need to be aware of the flow of both spontaneous and receptive desire over the course of the desire curve, and recognize the tendency is to forget about the original desire set point. By recalling the original desire set point and comparing the post-NRE set point with the original, rather than comparing it with that at peak NRE, you will do much to counter the illusion that your return to baseline is an actual loss overall. And that is important to keep in mind. It is very hard to keep in mind, but it is important to keep in mind because, the high, you will never regain those highs. But those initial highs are a different type of high than you can get with a relationship that is built with the idea of, long-term, cohabitation in your life, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, long-term, deep involvement in your life.
Indeed, I mean, because NRE is a beautiful rush. If there's any drug I've loved more than anything else, it's NRE. But it's also artificial in a lot of ways because when you are just meeting up with that person, having those chemical highs are great, but you got to acknowledge the fact that the best highs are the ones that you're going to get, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 12, 15 years down the road, if you get to that point. It's
if you value old relationship energy as much as you do new relationship energy. And, old relationship energy is that more comfortable, soothing, compassionate, what do you call it when things are genuine positive regard for the other person, unconditional love, those kinds of things you get in old relationship energy that you don't have in NRE.
Yeah, and the chemicals in your brain will settle down, and that's when the real work of a relationship begins in a lot of ways. Again, the reason we're talking about this week is to acknowledge that it's a thing. I think that, again, like I said, I only learned about this in my 40s. Even though I experienced it from the first time I ever had a crush on somebody, it's, once you can, it's like the name it to tame it deal. If you realize it is there, you realize it is a thing, then, cross fingers. Even if you are in the throes of an NRE high, at the very least, you will have an anchor that will say, hold up, step back, and, put steps in your life to make sure that you are sustaining this in the right way. Because trust me, folks, you don't want to make decisions on an NRE high. It can lead to much more heartbreak, and also to acknowledging the fact that the NRE high is artificial because it is chemicals going on. It's not creating that sustained, relationship high that you mentioned there, because people that have known each other for a number of years are going to have a much deeper connection than, someone that is in the rush of, they're this most specialist person in the world. And that's a fun, one hell of an experience to go through. But again, that's not the meat and potatoes of what, being in a romantic relationship is. It really isn't. And if that's all you want, then just sleep around, but do it respectively, of course, but just sleep around and don't try and, go for something long term if all you are looking for is just that initial rush. I mean, the initial rush is great, but what is really more important is what comes after.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't let this subject pass without talking about the experience of it in polyamorously structured relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine, if you will, the existence of this new relationship energy.
It's like a hipster Twilight Zone. Imagine, if you will.
Imagine, if you will. You have two girlfriends, and one you've been dating for 8 years, and the other one you met 6 months ago. How do you think you're going to naturally want to treat the person that you've been with for 8 years?
Well, I mean, to your point, I mean, if you don't acknowledge what NRE is and just ride that high, your instinct is going to be new, I want the new. And in and of itself, there is nothing wrong with that. But I think, especially in polyamorous relationships, the important thing is to, I think even though I was so resistant to this for a long time, it's the importance of scheduling. It's the importance of making sure you put time in your life every single week to still be with that partner that, in this example, that you've been with for 8 years. And it may look different. The types of interaction you have with that person on the scheduled time that you have may look different than it does with the person with the NRE, because you didn't go further into what this example is, but let's assume for the sake of argument that the two people that are living together for 8 years are living together for 8 years, so they can have different types of experiences that don't necessarily require, going out to a restaurant or something like that. You can have a special game night at home with them, for example, or something like that. But the important thing is to schedule that time and respect that time, because, in a polyamorous relationship, you're hoping, the ideal is that, you can sustain 2 or more of romantic relationships going forward. It's just not letting yourself fall into the trap of searching for that high and just trying to maintain it, because at that point someone will get hurt.
Yep. And then when you come out of the new relationship energy with the new partner and are settling in with that new partner, you're like, oh shit, I was an asshole to my other partner for the last 6 months because I've been completely obsessed with this other person, and I've been disrespectful in X way and Y way. And, hopefully the person can realize it. Hopefully the person can be honest and transparent with their partner about the mistakes that they made. And, maybe the other partner is like, okay, I can understand what was going on. But maybe the other partner's like, yeah, screw you. You were an asshole. So if you want to maintain that relationship, you really have to put the work in more when you're going through NRE than just a regular day.
Indeed. I mean, relationships of all kinds, romantic and platonic, take work. They take time. And, if you're not going to put that work and time into it, then it will wither. I mean, it's like a plant, I mean, it's just in polyamory, you have multiple plants that you're taking care of. And, again, the important thing is to try and put that work in. And, if anything too, it's the importance of communication. I am very guilty of this myself, of, not wanting to hurt another person. So I don't say the things that, I probably should say. Sometimes, in relationships, you got to have the talk. I mean, the talk can be about any number of things, but sometimes you got to have the talk, and those talks can be important. And those talks, if taken in the right way on both sides, can help make the relationship better, because no relationship will always be perfect. There's always going to be conflicts in a relationship because we're human. I don't think nobody, even my ex-wife, I'll put it out there, nobody gets into a relationship to intentionally hurt somebody else. it's just over time, with resentments and miscommunication, like happened with my ex-wife, it can lead to where you don't like the other person. And then at that point, you do tend to lash out. And I did plenty of lashing out myself, folks. So I'm not, trying to make myself, here look like the ultimate victim. My ex-wife and I were in a poisonous relationship to where we both at a much sooner time should have recognized the fact that it wasn't going to work. And one of us should have had the courage to walk away much sooner than we did. But, ideally, you have to accept that the other person that you are with is not a villain.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well said, Tim. No follow-up.
Indeed. I think that will wrap it up here for us, unless you had anything else you wanted to say about NRE.
I guess, we've been pretty hard on NRE during this show and really have been pointing out the negatives. But I will say, some of my most fulfilling and exciting times during my life have been those where I'm in NRE. There are huge dangers and things to watch out for. But as we've said several times, that awareness of the things to watch out for hopefully allow you to enjoy the NRE that you're experiencing, understanding that it's going to go away and honoring it and enjoying it for what it is.
And that is the key here, folks. Yeah, I mean, even with some of the cynical stuff I've said, please don't mistake that for me stating that you shouldn't enjoy the highs of NRE, because those highs of the highs of NRE and the relationships I've had in the past have led to a lot of great memories that I'll never forget. And they mean something to me, and they always will. And it's by recognizing what NRE does, the fact that it can lead to increased awareness of the existence of another person that wouldn't necessarily be there, and that will over time get back to a normal level. I mean, if you recognize what it can do, you can ride the waves of NRE so much better. And, again, there may still be some hurt along the way, because it's certainly possible that, that two people come along that, have physical attraction, but don't really have anything else, to offer for something long term. But recognizing NRE for what it is will help you not hurt as much, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's a method of self-preservation.
Indeed. So we thank you all for listening
to us. So persevere out there.
Oh,
persevere through it.
Persevere. That's right.
That's right. Relax into it. Persevere.
And
my wish for you.
Yeah, persevere, but also, schedule schedule your life accordingly. Schedule, stuff that, as the professor said, schedule. You need to make sure you have time for your own mental health and your other relationships, because, even in a monogamous relationship, you have other relationships out there, platonic relationships that should and still need to be, cultivated. And the more you do that, the more you will help that romantic relationship along.
Yep. Absolutely, Tim.
I can be right on occasion. I know that. Next week, I will be in Portland, Oregon, and so we'll be recording our next episode in person.
In person, yes. And we've always had such a great time recording in person.
Hey. Yeah, we are going to be talking about the importance of why sex work needs to be decriminalized.
That's awesome. I love that topic.
Yeah, and there's a difference between made legal and decriminalized, folks, because we'll get into it more, of course, but sex work is important. Sex work is vital, and the reasons that we will go into next week will show why criminalizing it is harmful to our society, even if you are the type of person that, may not ever want to associate with a sex worker, if you don't go to a prostitute, if you don't watch porn or something like that, it is still important to recognize the importance of what sex workers do for our society and why it is important to protect what they do.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing is that sex work is work. Mm-hmm. People are doing it for money. So what is the difference between pulling a lever with your body for 8 hours a day and dancing on a pole for 8 hours a day for tips? Like, it is labor. And so it should be treated the same as any other kind of labor. They should have the same protections as any other kind of employee. And what we find is that they're independent contractors. Like, there can't be employees because it is criminalized in most places in the United States. So it becomes much more dangerous for sex workers who really can't band together except under some oppressive regime.
Indeed. So that is what we are going to be discussing next week on Tim's Tremendous Tapes, the episode that is currently out. We are celebrating women this week. I've certainly on previous episodes played some tracks from some wonderful female artists, but this week every single album I listened to was from a wonderful female musician. We have Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, Blondie, Loretta Lynn, Janis Joplin, and Aretha Franklin. Next week's episode, we are gonna sing the blues because the music that I like, the rock and roll that started in the '60s, essentially with the British invasion, has its history in the American blues scene. And, and what I loved about, the bands that I do follow, like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, is that they understood their role in cultural appropriation, because cultural appropriation, in my opinion, in and of itself is not necessarily bad, so long as the person of the dominant culture is publicly acknowledging the work of the other culture in question and doing what they can to not only tell the world that this is where they got their inspiration from, but doing what they could to help them out financially as well. And like for the music that I like, even heavy metal has its history in the blues. So we'll be talking about the blues.
That sounds so interesting. I can't wait to listen.
Indeed. So with that, another episode's in the books. Each Saturday, we'll have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
See ya, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.